Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of Player's Perspective, the interview series where I talk to those involved in geek culture and get to know them a little better. Today's guest is a games journalist with an eye for the obscure to make sure you know all about it in the weird and wonderful world of independent video games. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chris Priestman. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hello, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
So, Chris, you're as I said, you're a games journalist, and you've worked for a variety of publications. The most recent being Pocket Gamer, Kill Screen, and Silken Era, where you do the daily news and also write review pieces as well. You've also been the editor-in-chief at Indie Static. So, what was it that attracted you to writing about specifically indie games?
Specifically indie games. I've never actually written about AAA games ever in my I have, but not been my focus. I think a lot of people tend to move from writing about AAA games down to kind of indie games. But I've always had a focus on indie games, and it started off. I used to write for a website in my free time back in 2010 called Hooked Gamers. I started off doing the podcast there. I was the host of the podcast, and I used to do all the recording and edit it and everything. And then after about a month or two of doing that, they asked if I wanted to write some game news there. But I wasn't that interested in doing some of the bigger games, so I tried to focus on bringing some indie game news to that website. And it basically started off there, and I kind of it was just a part-time thing. Well, it wasn't even part-time. It was a spare time thing. I used to write one review a month and then do some news every other day or something like that. And I moved from there. I used to write for Indie Game Mag, and that's when I decided I was just gonna. I pretty much decided, and I think I wrote something about this at the time, that I was going to try and be the main kind of source myself, not a particular website, but myself. For indie game news, and that's pretty much where it started in my head, and that was probably about 2011, so 3 years ago, and since then I haven't looked back, pretty much.
So you've never sort of gravitated towards the more as they would say, the more mainstream releases. You've been very much on the up and coming developers.
Yeah, the thing is, when I decided to write about indie games, it wasn't. I didn't initially want to make it a job, but it became a job, and that's what I got paid for. So, how I saw it is, if you're going to try and get a job in, say, game journalism or just write about games in general, you've got to have a focus, and that's something that I was told a long time ago. It's best to have a focus, so someone knows if they're hiring you what you're going to bring precisely. If you're trying to be vague and say, "Oh, I can cover this, 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 and this," they're going to be like, "Well, so can everyone else. But what specific knowledge can you bring to our website or whatever it might be?" So I always went for indie games because there wasn't a lot of people covering indie games, and it was starting to become a bigger thing around 2010-ish. Well, it was before then, but it was starting to become a bigger thing on websites. I remember Eurogamer, who I did write a piece for back then. They actually had an editor's note go up on the website in about 2011 or 12, I don't know, around then. And it was, they did a reader survey, and one of the things that their readers asked for was indie game coverage. So I immediately jumped on there. I was like, "Do you need someone to cover indie games?" And they were like, "Yeah, okay." And so I wrote one article for them, so it didn't go very far. But that was because I think I was very amateur then. I probably still am now, but more so then. And yeah, it was I've always covered on indie games. I have written about bigger games too, like the odd article, and I wrote about Call of Duty a couple of weeks ago exactly. So yeah, I have done it every now and then. I sometimes do get an urge to write about other games, but in terms of getting paid for coverage, it's always been indie games for me.
And is that how you see yourself continuing with your career?
Yes, pretty much. Everywhere I write for, Pocket Gamer, which was weird. I got that job. I did an interview for it, but I don't know who else or how many other people went for it, but I got it pretty much straight away. But Mark, who's my editor there, he always wants me to find small mobile games who aren't being covered anywhere else. So that's kind of my role there. Silicon Era is the same. They asked me specifically to do indie game news, and I'm starting to move into a little bit of, when there's no indie games news, I do a little bit of like game culture kind of stuff, so like mods or fan games, that kind of thing, which is almost on the same kind of level as indie games. And what's the other one? Killscreen. Yeah, I do weird. That's kind of where I do my weird, obscure games, and I can also write about pretty much anything there anyway. So yeah, and then yeah, it's not going to go away.
Another adventure you've set up is Warp Door, which you have co-created with Tim W., another a journalist, and that is kind of a hub for the more kind of obscure experimental games that you aim to give coverage to. So how did that come about, and what are your goals for Warp Door?
Okay, so Warp Door came about, it's only been around since about April or May 2014, and it came about after I stepped down from Indie Static, which is where I previously shared mainly weird free games or small little games that no one else would bother covering. Maybe indiegames.com did sometimes. So after stepping down from Indie Static, Tim actually reached out to me and was like, do you want to start a little website with me where we can share some free games and stuff? I was like, yeah, sure. So we started it up, and then we weren't actually going to launch it until the summer of 2014. But then free indie games kind of stopped posting, so we decided to kind of just like, okay, we can't let there be a gap, or as long as we can. So we basically just jumped on that. It was like, okay, we're launching now or as soon as possible. Now that free indie games is gone, so we kind of we weren't trying to replace them, but we were just trying to make sure there was no gap in which free games are coming out, and people knew which ones that were coming out then, and yeah, we've just been going since then. We're still in a kind of work in progress state, so it's not finished yet. But and my aims for Warp Door have changed over time a little bit. Initially, I wanted it to be kind of eventually be like Indie Static, but I don't have the time or means to be able to do that anymore. So now it's mainly just kind of how it is, maybe a bit bigger. I want to do more interviews and I want to do a few more articles. I used to do a roundup on there on Sundays called Pocket Dimension, which I haven't done because I've been so busy recently. But yeah, it's mainly just for sharing the games that other places don't or won't for whatever reason. Just because me and Tim are really passionate about those kind of games, and we don't want to see that kind of coverage just slip away, which it is anyway, but we're just going to kind of try and keep it going, and we hope other people will, kind of join in with us with other websites. There are a few other little websites out there, and some other people that do share small games, so we're kind of a little community of people who do that, but long-term goals is just to keep doing that, really. There isn't any grander plans unless something dramatically changes in our kind of situation.
Now that is completely funded by Patreon, which is one of a number of different crowdfunding sites. Yeah, you also have Indiegogo, and the most prominent one being Kickstarter. Now, and you use Patreon to create a fully ad-free environment. So how has that been for you so far, and what do you think have been the challenges of funding a website in that manner?
Well, the thing is, like I said, Warp Door is kind of, it doesn't get many hours put into it by anyone, really. It's a very small thing for all of us. So Patreon has mainly been used to pay for server costs and all that kind of thing, which doesn't amount to a lot, really. And I don't know, with Indie Static, we had a Kickstarter and that worked for a while. I don't know what's happened with that website since. I know it's gone down since then. Literally gone down. But I don't know. I don't think you could actually fund a whole website with a team of writers on Patreon unless you already had a huge following. That's one of the problems with Patreon, is that you have to have a lot of people who know and they want to fund what you do. So with Warp Door, it's kind of I've only got a few people on Patreon who fund my personal one, and Tim has another one who has a bit more. And that's enough just to keep us posting. We think we do about 6 or 7 games a day, but we don't actually write anything about them. We don't have time to do that because we're doing work elsewhere. But like if I had, say, $1,000 a month coming from Patreon, I might be able to nearly do it full time on Warped Door. But I mean, that's not going to happen probably. So for now, it's just a small thing. What Patreon's really good for is for like individual writers. There's a few people like Lana Polanski and Cameron Kunzelman, and individual creators as well. But in terms of like team stuff, I've not really seen any team stuff really kick off on Patreon. I haven't really looked, so I could just be talking at my ass. But yeah, I don't think it can really. It's not reliable enough for that kind of thing. I don't think that's the problem with it.
So the general idea of crowdfunding, it seems to put in some ways it almost changes from the way I see it. It almost changes the identity of consumers, say, into financial backers.
Mm-hmm.
In some respects, and that almost, of course, even though it's a voluntary process, it almost shifts the sort of the burden of responsibility towards the consumer. So, so do you think with so many, there are obviously so many individuals or those that want products to be funded using the crowdfunding model? Do you think there's a danger of oversaturation in that area?
In terms of there's not enough people to fund something, you mean?
Well, that, and but also with the idea of so many projects, competing projects for people's time and money.
I think you tend to see a lot of the same people funding similar types of things. That's one thing I've noticed. In terms of like oversaturation, I don't know. It's weird because Patreon's still quite new-ish. I'm not sure exactly how old it is, but it's quite new, so it's still being tested, really. And I know one thing that people have brought up is that it might compromise some of your, if you're, say, a game journalism website or a journalism website, it might compromise your ethics in some way or whatever. But another way of looking at it is, otherwise you're kind of at the behest of a corporation most of the time with adverts and whatever. So it's kind of pro and con either way. And I prefer to be funded by individual people who actually cared about what we were putting up and not just looking to make money out of us, kind of thing. That's the kind of pros I see on Patreon. I don't know if it will ever get oversaturated. I know I've seen people who've had to retract their funding amounts from it, and it might make a big impact on some people if they're relying on Patreon funds to pay rent or whatever. That's the kind of thing that I say that's why it's unreliable at times. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's still got Patreon still has some proving to do. It's not old enough to be able to really judge it at this point, I don't think, or at least I don't think I feel like it's old enough to judge it. I don't have enough experience with it or anything, but it could happen. There's definitely a lot of risks there, and obviously there is with crowdfunding in general, with Kickstarter and any kind of crowdfunding model. I'd say there's more risks for the creators than there is if you're having like a proper corporate backing or something like that. That just seems like the logical thing to have happened, I guess.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see how it continues, particularly with, I know that a Kickstarter may be starting to run its course with so many different things being put on there. You've even had potato salad.
Yeah.
Funding potato salad. So
yeah. Well, the Kickstarter's a weird one because I actually got fed up with Kickstarter about 2 years ago, which is when it just kind of got kicked off with the whole Double Fine thing. And now these days there are not many Kickstarters. In fact, I've been told by editors before to deliberately not cover Kickstarters because there's just so many of them, and they kind of feel like you can't promise the reader anything with them because there's no guarantee they're going to get funded. And then if you say, "Oh, this game might be coming out next year or something," and then it doesn't, and then you kind of feel like you've let them down yourself, even though it's nothing to do with like your fault or anything. Yeah, I've personally got fatigued from Kickstarter and that kind of thing. Unless it's a really outstanding project tonight and you can see it's going to get funded, then you might consider covering it or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely running its course, I think.
Although I definitely think a good example of that, of a product that was did get funded in that way, would be Shovel Knight, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the one of the rare successful examples, and that would have, even like after that came out, everyone who hadn't heard of it before was loving it. It was just one of those games that kind of was going to do well regardless of, as long as it was released, it was going to do well. Apparently, anyway, no one knew that until it was released, obviously, but one of those rare examples, yeah.
Now, obviously, given the scale and the budget of independent developers, of course, the AAA developers will have greater resources in that respect. But right now, how do you see the overall general health of the indie scene and where you think it can go?
I'm not the kind of person who tends to look at it as a scene, because it's not really a scene. It's just a bunch of people who enjoy making games, and they do that as their hobby. Some people take it further eventually, or they don't ever at all. But yeah, it's kind of like there's more people making small games than there ever were now, I think. The problem is trying to find where these games are. I mean, you can look at itch.io or itch.io, whatever you want to call it, and GameJolt, and those kind of websites that have portals specifically for basically any type of game you want to make and put up there. But yeah, it's I don't know. I struggle to see it as anything more than just a bunch of bunch of people making small games. I don't really see it as a scene. I think it's become, because there are more and more people making it, it's even harder to call it a scene than it used to be, like, say, 6 or 7 years ago, which it kind of did feel like a scene then, I guess. Mainly around TigSource and the forums at Indie Gamer. Yeah, I don't know. I can't really answer that question well because, I don't know, I kind of see it differently, I guess.
Well, I'm sure it will carry on as it very much has.
Yeah, I mean, there's always new people making games and inspired by other people, and they just keep doing it. And a lot of people who make games who I know, they don't even pay attention to what happens to their games, who plays them or anything. They just make them and put them out there, and then they have no other interaction with them. And there's always going to be those types of people, and they'll just make wacky things that you'd never think of before because they kind of not in with the, like, when you're kind of in with like all the other developers, you see a lot of the same ideas bounced around. It's the same if you were brought up with games. Trying to make games, you tend to make the games that you know. So I guess like that is something that more people who didn't grow up with games are trying to make games now, which is something that we also do. We encourage at Killscreen, is looking at games from different perspectives and seeing what else can be done with like the medium of video game. Yeah, it's going to continue. Like, it's always going to continue. I think it's not going to die down. There's still people making short independent films, and that's been going for years. So I don't think it's going to die down. It's just going to keep going.
So, Chris, what future projects do you have down the pipeline?
In terms of future projects, I don't actually have much going on at the moment in the future. Just mainly continuing what I'm doing. I've recently moved. This is my third time I've moved out from my parents' house. And I'm hoping to actually stay out at my parents' house this time. So I'm really kind of trying to concentrate on paying my own rent and that kind of thing. So that involves doing the three, like you said earlier, the 3 jobs I do, as well as running Warped Door, which Warped Door isn't really contributing to anything in terms of my bills. And a lot of my time is taken up with those 3 jobs. It's writing news 5 days a week for 3 different websites, which is basically all my weekdays gone. If I do get urges sometimes to do something else. I really would like to do some more video stuff. I've done it before in the past. Like when the website I worked for before, Hooked Gamers, I also did video reviews on there, and I started. One of my first ones was Super Meat Boy, I think, and that kind of thing. I've always wanted to do more video stuff, but it's just having the time. It's so much editing time and recording time, and I also want to do I don't want to do like let's plays or anything like that. I want to do something scripted. I prefer to do something like a video essay or something. So it's just having the time. But I think I will maybe try to do something like that. I don't know. It depends. I just don't have much time at the moment. That's the problem.
Well, I'm sure you'll be able to get those projects off the ground.
Hopefully. We'll see.
Chris, what do you have to say to all the people who have followed you throughout your career and have followed you from different websites? What do you have to say to all of them?
Well, obviously, I'm really, really appreciative of everyone who's kind of followed what I do. I'm more appreciative if they kind of pay attention, like not to what I'm doing, but what I'm sharing. I do this to share games, or not just games, but anything I find that's really interesting. And I just hope people see that, and I think people do see that, and I think they want to. They don't care about me. I don't care about me. I care about the things I find and what other people are creating, because I'm not a creator, and I'm fascinated, and I really admire people who can create stuff and put the time towards that, because my attention span is terrible. I cannot create things. I have tried to make little games before, but I just don't have the attention span for it most of the time. I'm terrible. So I'm really appreciative of anything you can come up with. You can, first of all, create anything, and second of all, create something that's really new or unique or interesting, or just, whatever out there. I don't care. As long as it's kind of different, I'm really into it. And I hope that, people who have followed me or whatever, I don't know if there are people out there, but I presume there's a few, the Phil Solves, who follow me, and they really appreciate what as much as I do, but the things I find and share, really.
Awesome. So, Chris, whereabouts can we find you on the internet?
Everywhere. No, I'm on Twitter at C Priestman. That's my Twitter handle. Otherwise, I don't have a lot of time on there, but you'll find my writing, as you said earlier, on siliconera.com, pocketgamer.co.uk, killscreendaily.com, and obviously Warpdoor, which is WIP for work in progress.warpdoor.com. And there's also like Tumblr accounts and Facebook things for all those things. But yeah, main line of communication is Twitter for me, mostly. If you want to get directly to me, if you want to see what the hell I write, then I also share it on there, but you can also go to those websites.
Great, so all of those links will be in the description below this video if you would like to check those out. So Chris, it's been really great talking to you today.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and I'm glad you actually managed to catch up with me. People won't know this. Patrick has been trying to catch up with me for the past, I don't even know how many months, and I've missed him like twice at least. So I'm really sorry to Patrick for screwing that up a couple of times, and I'm glad to actually have been on the show for once. Actually made it here. Way.